Let's see if that deaf janitor can fix my $1 million robot." Gavin Reed said his words cutting through the air like a blade as he let out a dry laugh in the gleaming conference room. His laughter echoed, joined by the snickers of executives bouncing off the glass walls. No one imagined that minutes later this very room would fall so silent one could hear their own heartbeat. Naomi Brooks lowered her head, her hands gripping the cleaning cloth until her knuckles turned white. The smell of disinfectant mixed with stale coffee hung thick in the air. She didn't look up, but Gavin's reflection glared back at her from the polished tabletop, the look of a man who'd spent his life above others, convinced that those below him were just nameless pawns. Reed Tech Industries, headquartered in Chicago, felt less like a workplace and more like a daily performance. People in sleek suits, charts flashing across giant screens, and arrogance disguised as professionalism. Today was no different. The NeuroSync project. A multi-million-dollar AI robotics system had just crashed. The prototype had powered down mid-demonstration. Gavin, head of production, was furious, as if the malfunction had stained his reputation. Instead of finding the cause, he chose someone to blame. "You probably spilled water into the port while mopping," Gavin said loudly, turning toward Naomi. "Do you even realize what that robot's worth? About 10 years of your salary?" Laughter filled the room. Naomi lifted her face, her dark brown eyes steady and calm, in a way that made the room falter for a brief moment. She didn't speak. Instead, her hands moved gracefully, forming signs, simple fluid gestures. No one understood except Olivia Tran, the young CFO, sitting at the far corner. Olivia recognized the message, "I can fix it." A second of silence. Gavin burst out laughing. "Oh, really? Do you even know what code means? Or are you going to wipe it clean and hope it restarts itself?" The room erupted again. Olivia frowned, discomfort spreading in her chest. Naomi stepped toward the control panel, each movement light yet confident, as if she belonged there. She placed her fingers on the keyboard, typing so fast that no one could react in time. Lines of code appeared, not random symbols, but precise NeuroSync system commands. Within seconds, the robot's lights flickered from green to white, the signal of a perfect reboot. Gasps filled the room. Gavin froze, his mocking smile gone. "How did you—" He couldn't even finish before Naomi stepped back, bowing slightly as if nothing had happened. She picked up her mop and returned to cleaning as though all she had done was wipe away a stain. Olivia watched, her heart pounding. She didn't understand everything, but she knew she had just witnessed something far greater than a repair. There was something in Naomi's eyes, a secret, a buried pain, and a strength compressed beneath years of silence. Gavin tried to recover his composure. "Just luck," he muttered. "Don't let this make you think you're an engineer." But his voice trembled. He had no idea that the code Naomi typed was the very core of NeuroSync, something she herself had written 3 years earlier before an explosion in the lab took her hearing and forced her to leave the field. Naomi walked down the corridor, fluorescent lights, reflecting off the polished floor. Each step echoed faintly in her mind, a rhythm she no longer heard, but still felt through her heartbeat. In that moment, she realized she had just cracked open her own disguise. The deaf janitor had revealed a glimpse of the inventor buried beneath her silence. Back in the conference room, Gavin slumped into his chair, gripping the folder in his hand. Olivia glanced at him and said quietly, "You might want to check your security systems. It seems your janitor just saved your company from a multi-million-dollar server crash." Gavin said nothing. Sweat gathered on his forehead. He couldn't explain what had just happened. He only knew one thing for certain: that deaf woman knew far more than he'd ever imagined. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time, Gavin felt uneasy, not for the project, but for his own power. Because in the world of technology and arrogance, the ones they look down on are often the ones holding the real keys. The next morning, the 12th floor of Reed Tech was still bathed in its cold blue light. Naomi Brooks arrived at exactly 6 o'clock as always. She wore rubber gloves, a mask, and pushed her cart filled with bottles and cleaning tools. Everything looked so ordinary that no one would have guessed this same woman had left the entire boardroom breathless the night before. She worked in absolute silence, her steps so light they made no sound on the floor. But inside her mind, there was no silence at all. Memories flickered like ghosts: the blinding explosion, the smell of burning wires, and the image of her younger brother engulfed in flames 3 years ago. She had once believed she would never return to the world of technology. But fate had led her back hidden under the uniform of a janitor inside the very company now run by Gavin Reed. 8 months had passed. Naomi chose to live like a shadow. No friends, no conversations, only quiet observation. Every path the engineers took, every line of code they typed, every testing protocol, they were all recorded in her memory with machine-like precision. For her, cleaning was never just about wiping floors. It was her way of reading the world, a language of light motion and heartbeat. As the vacuum hummed along the corridor, she glanced through the glass wall of the lab. Inside, a team of young engineers struggled with the NeuroSync Alpha prototype. She spotted the flaw instantly. The visual sensor was misaligned by 3 degrees, which meant the recognition system would always be off. She wanted to step in and correct them, to say one simple thing, but she knew she couldn't. In this place, her silence had become part of her identity, and her quietness was seen as weakness. Every night when the building finally sank into stillness, Naomi came alive again. She opened her notebook and recorded every detail: system errors, redundant code, even the way Gavin often altered reports to make his data look perfect. She knew now that he was a performer, not an engineer. He didn't understand the mechanics of NeuroSync. Once she ran into Olivia Tran in the hallway. The young CFO was the only person in the building who ever greeted her with a kind smile. That day, Olivia typed something quickly on her phone, and showed it to Naomi. "I saw what you did last night. I know you're more than a janitor." Naomi smiled faintly and signed say nothing. Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with curiosity and respect. Outside, December snow fell heavily, covering the window frames in white. In the small break room, Naomi sat sipping black coffee with no sugar. She watched the internal news ticker scrolling on the screen. Reed Tech announces expansion of the NeuroSync project, aiming to develop robots to assist people with disabilities. She let out a soft laugh. If the world knew that the foundation of NeuroSync had been created by a deaf woman scrubbing floors in that very building, what would they think each passing second made Naomi more certain that she could not stay hidden forever? Not because she craved recognition, but because the project, the one she had once devoted her entire life to, was being twisted into something unrecognizable. Gavin Reed was turning it into a commercial weapon, stripping away its original human purpose. That afternoon, Gavin walked down the hallway, his leather shoes striking the floor in a rhythm of arrogance. He stopped when he saw Naomi cleaning near the conference room. "You," he said, his voice carrying that familiar superiority yesterday was just luck. "Don't think I don't know what you're trying to do." Naomi looked at him without expression. People like you never break boundaries here. Gavin continued leaning closer to whisper mute-deaf inferior. Reed Tech is a world for the capable. Naomi tightened her grip on the mop handle veins rising across her hand. Her eyes weren't angry, they were cold, so cold that Gavin instinctively stepped back. In that instant, he saw something in her, not fear, but silent power. As he walked away, Naomi watched him go. She knew his contempt would continue, but next time she wouldn't stay silent. Maybe fate had brought her back here for a reason, not as a janitor, but as the woman who once gave life to the very machine Gavin was trying to claim. Night fell, and the city of Chicago glittered beneath the snow. Naomi stood by the window, gazing at the endless stream of headlights below. In the reflection, her eyes no longer held only sorrow. There was fire in them now, small but unyielding. She knew the storm hadn't come yet, and when it did, the one who mocked her silence would be the first to bow before its power. Monday morning, the 13th floor of Reed Tech glowed under cold white light. The large conference room reflected the brightness onto the polished stone floor, where managers and senior engineers sat around an oval table. They whispered, tapped keyboards, adjusted ties, pretending to be busy, while waiting for the one man none of them dared to irritate, Gavin Reed. He arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, wearing a dark suit and a red tie, his stride firm and deliberate, as if every tile belonged to him. The moment he sat down at the head of the table, the atmosphere shifted. "We need to cut whatever is slowing this project down," Gavin said evenly, his voice sharp and resonant across the room. "NeuroSync needs progress, and I can't have the disabled engineering team dragging us back. This is a company, not a charity." Silence fell. Some lowered their heads, others pretended to take notes. In the corner, Naomi Brooks, the janitor, continued working quietly. She couldn't hear his words, but she didn't need to. Reading his lips was enough, and each word hit her like a dull blade. Olivia Tran, the young chief financial officer, broke the silence. "You're talking about the people who built the foundation of NeuroSync. Without them, this project wouldn't even exist." Gavin smirked. "I'm not denying their contributions, Olivia, but compassion doesn't replace efficiency." He paused, looking at her with a mocking glint. "Technology doesn't need emotions, only results." Olivia met his gaze, her tone steady. "But the people who create technology are human." "Forget that. And you'll only build machines without a soul." Gavin waved a hand, dismissive. "I've heard enough motivational speeches for a lifetime." He turned toward the screen where the NeuroSync robot stood motionless, its red indicator light flashing relentlessly. "This multi-million-dollar piece of junk still won't boot up." "Perfect." He struck the table lightly. "I need someone who can work, not someone who makes excuses," the chief engineer stammered. "We're trying, but the issue lies within the core system." Gavin cut him off. "I don't pay people to try." Naomi looked up, her eyes catching the flashing red error on the screen. One glance was all it took. She saw the problem, a single syntax mistake. In the control code, one misplaced character enough to paralyze the entire system. She set her mop aside and stepped forward. Gavin noticed and frowned. "What do you think you're doing? Planning to mop the control panel too?" Naomi didn't answer. Her hands moved in swift, deliberate signs. Olivia understood instantly and translated slowly. "She says she can fix it." Laughter erupted around the room. Gavin laughed the loudest, his voice hoarse with arrogance. "Really? The janitor wants to save the multi-million-dollar project. Fascinating. If you fix it, I'll resign." But if you fail, you're out of this company for good. Naomi's eyes met his, still and calm like the surface of a lake. Yet there was something beneath them that made Gavin instinctively step back. No one could explain it, maybe because she wasn't afraid. Without hesitation, Naomi approached the console. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, fast, light, precise, and the entire room fell silent. Lines of code appeared weaving together in perfect harmony, like a song without words. 3 minutes passed. No one breathed. Then a soft ping. The red light vanished, replaced by a calm blue glow. The robot tilted its head slightly, its arm moving with fluid precision. Flawless. A collective exhale rippled through the room. Gavin stood frozen. Olivia motionless. Naomi turned her hands, signing a short message. Olivia read aloud, her voice clear. "Do you still think I'm just a janitor?" No one spoke. Gavin forced a crooked smile. "Fine. If you want to prove yourself tomorrow at 7 p.m. in front of the entire technical board, we'll hold an official test. If you win, I'll step down. If you lose, you'll never set foot in this building again." He turned and walked out. The glass door closed behind him, leaving the room so quiet the hum of the air conditioner was deafening. Naomi watched him go, then picked up her mop. Olivia stepped closer and asked softly, "Who are you really?" Naomi met her eyes and gave a faint smile. No words came out, only a quiet spark in her gaze beneath the fluorescent light. Inside, she already knew tomorrow would be the true battle, the moment when silence itself would speak for her. The following evening, the Reed Tech building gleamed in the heart of Chicago, its lights reflecting across rain-soaked streets. On the 13th floor, the testing lab had been rearranged like a stage. At the center stood the NeuroSync Alpha robot, its metallic frame glinting under the white light sensors, blinking softly, waiting to be activated. Naomi Brooks entered no longer in her gray janitor's uniform, but in a simple shirt. Her hair was tied neatly, her face calm. In her hand was a small case, heavier than any cleaning tool she had ever carried. Gavin Reed was already waiting, arms crossed, confidence radiating from his posture. He smirked. "You're right on time. I hate waiting for people who don't understand the value of time." Naomi gave a small nod. Behind him, more than 20 people had gathered, the technical board, the executive team, and Olivia Tran, the only one who looked uneasy. She stepped forward and signed gently, "You have me here." Naomi returned a faint smile, then placed the case on the control desk. David, the verification engineer, announced, "Each side has 10 minutes. Whoever gets NeuroSync running stably wins." Gavin looked at Naomi with mock pity. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. I wouldn't want to be accused of bullying the janitor." Naomi opened the case and pulled out a portable hard drive. Olivia immediately recognized it, the original NeuroSync core that had been discarded by Reed Tech 3 years earlier. She held her breath as Naomi connected it to the system. The screen lit up lines of code cascading down like a waterfall. Gavin frowned. 5 minutes later, the robot began to move. Its joints turned smoothly. Its sensors glowed blue, the signal of perfect synchronization. The room went silent. Naomi didn't smile. She simply stepped back. Her work was done. "Impressive," Gavin said, his lips curling, "but let me show you how professionals operate." He inserted his access card and took control of the interface. Instantly, warning text flashed across the screen, "Conflict detected." The robot jerked violently, emitting a sharp metallic screech. Olivia shouted, "You're damaging it!" "She embedded unauthorized code," Gavin snapped. "I'm removing it." Naomi signed quickly. Olivia translated. She says it's a protective wall. If you remove it, the robot will lose control. Gavin let out a harsh laugh. I know what I'm doing. He hit enter. The robot's arm swung suddenly, slamming into the metal table. Sparks exploded into the air. Chaos erupted as people backed away. Naomi rushed forward, pulling Gavin aside before typing a new command. 10 seconds later, the system powered down completely. The air was heavy, suffocating. Olivia glared at Gavin. You almost destroyed a multi-million-dollar project. If she hadn't intervened, we'd have lost everything. Sweat rolled down Gavin's temple as he stammered. She must have planted the bug. I don't believe Naomi's eyes cut through him like steel. Her hands moved slowly, her signs clear. I built this system. 3 years ago, you stole it. Whispers rippled across the room. Olivia's jaw dropped. Others exchanged stunned glances. Gavin stepped back, his voice trembling. You're lying. There's no proof. Calmly, Naomi connected the hard drive to the projector. The screen filled with old documents, each signed Naomi Brooks, lead developer. Charts code structures and the earliest NeuroSync blueprints appeared one by one, each bearing her digital signature. The room fell silent. Gavin's face turned pale, his mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Olivia looked at Naomi with a mix of admiration and awe. In that moment, no one saw her as a janitor anymore. Naomi removed the hard drive and glanced around the room. Olivia's voice was soft as she translated the final sign. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to reclaim my voice. No one spoke. Gavin bowed his head, his breath unsteady. The white light cast across Naomi's face, highlighting a rare, unshakable resolve. Olivia understood then this test hadn't just changed the project. It had changed the way everyone in that room would see the woman standing before them. From that night on, in ReadTech's internal records, a single line was added to the NeuroSync project file system originated from N. Brooks. Undeniable. And on that rain-soaked night, silence finally found its voice. That night, the city was veiled in rain as thin as smoke. In a small apartment on the 4th floor, Naomi Brooks sat at an old wooden desk, the yellow glow of the lamp spreading across the worn edges of her notebook. On its faded pages lay the very first sketches of NeuroSync, the project she and her younger brother Marcus had created 3 years ago. Every stroke of ink, every symbol brought back the image of the bright young man, with the easy smile and restless hands always sketching dreams of a future where the deaf could hear the world through sensory technology. On the night of the prototype launch, the lab exploded. Marcus died. Naomi survived but lost her hearing. ReadTech quickly called it a technical malfunction and sealed the files. Gavin Reed, then the project head, was granted full ownership of the patent. Naomi, the true creator of NeuroSync, was erased from every document. She disappeared, returning years later as a janitor in the very building that bore the name of the man who had stolen her life's work. Now, after last night's test, the secret was out. She knew Gavin would not stay quiet, but fear had died within her. That same night, the lab burned. What remained was one conviction: the truth had to be heard. The phone buzzed softly. A message from Olivia. Read, Gavin is meeting with the lawyers. They plan to sue you for breaching confidentiality. Naomi read it, her expression calm, and typed back, they can try. I have proof. She reached under the bed and pulled out a scratched old metal hard drive from a wooden box. Etched across its surface in Marcus's handwriting were the words, if someone tries to hide the truth, let technology speak for us. She traced her fingers across the engraving, feeling the warmth of memory beneath the cold metal. In her mind, she could still hear Marcus's voice. "Sis, if NeuroSync works, the world will have to listen to the deaf." A tear slipped down the page, but Naomi didn't wipe it away. The next morning, rumors spread through ReadTech. People whispered about the deaf woman who had humiliated Director Gavin in front of everyone. Some engineers sent anonymous messages. "Thank you, you reminded us why we started this work." But inside the executive office, Gavin was losing control. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "I'll make sure she disappears before she even opens her mouth." His personal attorney sitting across from him spoke in a cold tone. "The best move is to strike first. We'll issue a non-disclosure order and accuse her of data theft." Gavin nodded, eyes gleaming with malice. "Do it." By late afternoon, Naomi received an internal summons email. The subject line in bold letters read, "Severe breach of confidentiality, subject to legal action." She read it carefully and smiled faintly. She had already lost everything once. There was nothing left to lose. She opened Marcus's old notebook and wrote one more line beneath the original design sketch, "Tomorrow justice will speak in the language of silence." Then she placed the original hard drive into a small fabric pouch and tucked it securely into her bag. Outside the window, the rain fell heavier, the streetlights reflecting off the glass and lighting up her face, not the face of the woman who once hid in the corners of a lab, but of someone rising from the ashes. Naomi stood, switched off the lamp, and the room sank into darkness. Only the steady sound of rain remained. She looked one last time at the photo of her and Marcus on the wall, then nodded softly. It was time for him to hear again. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was painted a pale gray. The ReadTech building seemed heavier than usual. Groups of employees whispered as Naomi Brooks walked down the hallway, her small figure drawing every gaze behind her. She wore a white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, a small bag in her hand. Today was the hearing, the day the deaf janitor would stand before the company's leadership. The large conference room on the 13th floor was silent. Gavin Reed sat at the head of the table, flanked by company lawyers and legal representatives. On the giant screen behind him glowed the cold, sterile words, "Internal Hearing Data Breach Violation." Olivia Tran was already there, sitting quietly in the back, her eyes filled with worry. A middle-aged man stood up. "Ms. Brooks, ReadTech accuses you of unauthorized access to the NeuroSync system and copying confidential data. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Naomi rose calmly. From her bag, she took out a hard drive and placed it on the table. The light reflected off her hand, slender yet steady. She began to sign, her eyes locked on Gavin. Olivia translated aloud. She says, "This is not stolen data. It is her own work stolen from her 3 years ago." Gavin let out a mocking laugh. "A janitor claiming to be a lead inventor. That's absurd." "Do you have any proof?" Naomi didn't answer. She plugged the hard drive into the projector, and the screen came alive. Old files appeared, project logs, sketches, and the very first test videos. On the screen, a younger Naomi was seen adjusting the robot alongside a smiling young man. His voice rang out clearly, "If NeuroSync succeeds, sis the deaf will hear through emotion." The room went completely silent. The last frame froze on the words, "Project NeuroSync lead developer Naomi Brooks." Olivia looked at Gavin and saw the color drain from his face. Still, he forced out a strained laugh. "That video has no legal standing. You can't prove anything." Naomi typed a few commands. The screen shifted to reveal the source code. She signed again, and Olivia translated. Every line of code in the system carries a developer's signature. Check it. Reed Tech's attorney opened his laptop and ran the trace command. Minutes passed before he finally looked up, his voice heavy. Signature N. Brooks, confirmed in the NeuroSync core. It cannot be falsified. The room froze. Gavin clenched his fists, his lips trembling. The presiding officer spoke firmly. Mr. Reed, pending investigation into ownership rights, you are suspended from your position as project director. Gavin tried to object, but the words caught in his throat. Olivia met Naomi's eyes with quiet pride. Naomi gave a slight bow, unplugged the hard drive, and turned to leave. Before walking out, she paused, signing slowly. I don't need fame. I just want you to stop destroying other people's dreams. The door closed behind her. Inside, Gavin collapsed into his chair, head bowed. No one spoke. No one met each other's eyes. But everyone knew a new era for Reed Tech had just begun. Naomi stepped into the brightly lit corridor, her stride steady and sure. Olivia hurried after her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You just made the entire company look at itself, she said softly. Naomi smiled, said nothing, and simply signed, I did what should have been done long ago. The two of them stopped by the glass window, gazing out at the city below. The rain had ended, and sunlight glimmered across the streets. Naomi placed her hand on the glass, feeling the faint vibrations, a sound she could not hear, but understood completely. Deep inside, she could feel Marcus smiling, and for the first time, silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like strength. News of the hearing spread through Reed Tech like a storm. The once quiet, white-lit hallways now buzzed with whispers. Everyone knew the truth. The deaf woman who had once mopped the floors was the very creator of NeuroSync. On the 13th floor, the laboratory doors opened again after months of being sealed. The NeuroSync Alpha robot stood in the center of the room, its silver-gray frame gleaming under the lights as if waiting to be reborn. Naomi Brooks entered. Gone was the old janitor's uniform. She now wore a white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, and carried her familiar toolbox. Beside her walked Olivia. Tran, her face more at ease than ever. The executive board has reached a decision, Olivia said. They want you back on the project this time as the official lead consultant. Naomi shook her head gently. She signed with calm determination, her eyes fixed on the robot. I'm not coming back for credit. I'm here to finish what Marcus never got to complete. Olivia nodded with a soft smile. I'll bring back the original engineering team. You won't have to do this alone. By afternoon, the engineers who had once been dismissed began returning one by one. They fell silent upon seeing Naomi, the woman they had once passed in the hallway without greeting, now standing at the center of the room. Naomi held no resentment. Instead, she wrote on the board, NeuroSync was never meant to make money. It was created to help people understand one another. The energy in the room shifted immediately. People started working again. Machines hummed, lights flickered to life, and streams of data filled the screens. Olivia watched from behind, feeling the lab come alive once more. Naomi worked carefully, reinstalling the neural chip Marcus had designed, the very component Reed Tech had removed when Gavin took control. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. Are you sure you want to keep the original version? Olivia asked. I can request funding for an upgrade. Naomi smiled and signed Marcus designed it for the human heart, not for the stock market. Olivia chuckled softly and said nothing more, watching her in quiet admiration. Late into the night, the lights in the lab still glowed. The robot stood motionless, awaiting activation. Naomi entered the final command, and the screen displayed NeuroSync V1.1 Human Connection mode. She placed her hand on the machine's surface, her eyes softening. "Can you hear me, Marcus? You're back." The next morning, media outlets flooded with headlines. Reed Tech suspends. Gavin Reed restores original NeuroSync development team. The company's CEO addressed the press declaring, "This technology was born from humanity, and it can only be led by someone who understands that truth." When asked about Naomi Brooks, he simply replied, "She doesn't need a title. She is the soul of NeuroSync." On the 13th floor, Naomi stood alone by the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were busy, the people rushing past, unaware that the silent woman above had just changed the history of their corporation. Olivia entered quietly and placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "You've made people believe again that technology can heal." Naomi smiled and wrote on a small piece of paper. "As long as someone is willing to listen, even silence has a voice." Olivia read it and nodded. The two women stood side by side, gazing out the window. The sun rose high, its golden light spilling across Naomi's face. She needed no applause, no sound, no audience. The silence surrounding her now was no longer loneliness, but proof that some dreams never die. They simply change form, so they can be heard more powerfully than ever before. On Monday morning, the Reed Tech building glowed under the brilliance of new lights. A sign reading NeuroSync Initiative hung proudly above the door of the 13th floor laboratory, drawing the attention of every employee who passed. Inside, Naomi Brooks stood in the middle of the spotless white room, quietly observing the young engineers as they powered up the NeuroSync Alpha robot. The reflected light illuminated her face, calm, focused, and confident. She was no longer the janitor she once had been. Olivia Tran entered a stack of papers in her hand. "The press wants to interview you," she said. "They're calling you the forgotten creator." Naomi smiled and signed with a serene expression. "I wasn't forgotten. I just chose the right moment to be silent." Olivia nodded gently, a knowing smile on her lips. Naomi was preparing for the final stage of NeuroSync the Symphony Protocol, an emotional interface she and Marcus had once dreamed of creating. "This part belongs to my brother," she signed. "I'm only finishing what he started." That entire day, the lab seemed alive again. Fingers tapped across keyboards. Machines hummed lights, flickered, and every person worked with purpose. No one needed to be told what to do. As evening fell, Gavin Reed appeared in the doorway. The arrogance that once defined him was gone. He stood still for a few seconds before speaking softly. "I didn't come to reclaim anything. I just came to apologize." Naomi turned to him, her gaze calm and steady. "You were right," Gavin said, his voice hoarse. "I took something that was never mine. Marcus believed in connection, but all I saw was profit. I was wrong." Naomi studied him for a long moment, then signed slowly. "If you truly regret it, protect what's right, not your name." Gavin nodded, eyes glistening. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to help." Naomi thought for a moment, then gave a small nod. Olivia translated softly. This time no one stands above the other. Night settled over the city, but the lab glowed brightly. Naomi and Gavin worked side by side at the control console, while Olivia watched in silence. When Naomi entered the final command, the screen lit up, Symphony Protocol connection established. The robot came to life, its blue light shifting to a warm golden hue that spread along its metallic frame. No one spoke. The robot's sensors began to pulse in rhythm with Naomi's heartbeat, a silent connection so profound that everyone in the room felt it. Olivia covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Gavin lowered his head and whispered, "This is what neurosync was meant to be." Naomi placed her hand on the robot, her eyes glowing with a light no one had ever seen before. She signed slowly. "I can hear you now, Marcus." The room fell into silence, not a silence of emptiness, but one that resonated with faith and renewal. When Olivia gently touched her shoulder and whispered, "You did it," Naomi smiled softly, her lips forming silent words. "Not me, us." 3 days after the Symphony Protocol was activated, the entire tech world trembled. The press called it the first emotional revolution in artificial intelligence history. Major newspapers ran headlines about the deaf woman who taught a robot to feel empathy. Yet, while social media erupted, Naomi Brooks quietly kept working far from the spotlight. She cared nothing for fame. The only thing that mattered to her was testing the stability of the system, because deep down, Naomi knew neurosync was more than a project. It was her final promise to Marcus. She worked for 3 straight days without leaving the lab. On Wednesday morning, Olivia Tran entered with a cup of hot coffee in her hand. "They want you to speak at the International Conference on Emotional Technology," she said. "The whole city is talking about you." Naomi smiled softly and signed, "I'm not finished. Symphony is still missing a piece." On the screen, the readings fluctuated slightly. Naomi opened one of Marcus's old journals and reread his messy notes. If a robot can feel pain, it can also choose not to cause harm. She stopped at the last line. "But to teach a machine to understand humans, humans must first learn to listen." Just then, the door opened. Gavin Reed stepped in thinner now, his face weary. "I just withdrew the lawsuit," he said quietly. "I'm resigning completely. I only wanted to say, thank you for letting me stay and start over." Naomi looked at him, her eyes softening. "No need to thank me. We're all still learning." Olivia approached and handed Naomi a thick envelope. "This is from the Board of Directors. They want you to become Director of Humanitarian Development Programs." Naomi shook her head. "I don't want a title. I want neurosync to belong to everyone." She placed the envelope on the table and turned back toward the robot. Gavin watched her and whispered, "If Marcus were here, he'd be proud." Naomi paused, her hand trembling slightly. After a moment of silence, she signed, "No, I'm the one who's proud of him." That afternoon, Reed Tech's press conference drew hundreds of reporters. Olivia stood at the podium, speaking on behalf of the entire team. "Neurosync is not just technology," she said. "It's proof that silence does not mean weakness. It can be the language of resilience." As she finished, Naomi stepped onto the stage, giving a small nod to the audience. The flashes of cameras lit up the hall. A reporter called out, "Do you have anything you'd like to say to the world?" Naomi took the microphone, hesitating for a few seconds. Then, in a weak, trembling voice, the voice she had spent nearly 3 years relearning, she spoke slowly and clearly. "Don't be afraid of silence. Within it lies the answer to everything humanity has forgotten to hear." The entire room rose in applause. Olivia wiped her tears, and Gavin bowed his head low. After the press conference, Naomi returned to the lab. She placed a photo of Marcus beside the robot and whispered, her voice still shaky, but stronger than ever, "I can hear you now, Marcus. And now, the whole world is listening with you. A week after the press conference, the world still hadn't stopped talking about the name Naomi Brooks. Online millions shared the video of her first words after 3 years of silence. Don't be afraid of silence. That single sentence had become a symbol for humanitarian programs, printed on posters and even on college t-shirts. Yet while others celebrated, Naomi returned to the 13th floor, the small room where it had all begun. She arrived early, powered up the system, and checked each line of code. Olivia Tran brought in 2 cups of coffee, placing one beside her. "The whole world wants to hear more from you," she said. "But here you are hiding." Naomi signed softly, a faint smile on her lips. "I'm not hiding. I'm listening." She pointed to the emotion graph on the screen. The symphony system was tracking real-time synchronization between human and machine. "The robot is reacting like a human," Olivia murmured. Naomi shook her head. "No, humans are learning to react like robots, honest, without judgment." The door opened, and Gavin Reed stepped in. No suit this time, just a simple shirt and quiet eyes. He walked over and placed a new ID badge on the table, Honorary Advisor NeuroSync Program, signed by the board. Naomi looked surprised, her gaze softening. "You didn't have to do that," she signed. Gavin smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Marcus. I owe him an apology." He looked toward the robot, his voice low. "I used to think power meant control, but it turns out it means knowing when to stop." Olivia watched them both and nodded gently. "So, NeuroSync hasn't just taught machines emotion, it's teaching humans humility." Gavin gave a quiet laugh. "She taught me that, not the technology." That afternoon, Naomi began the final test, the direct emotional transmission through neural signals. She attached the sensor to her wrist, and a soft blue light began to spread. The robot stood still, then slowly started mirroring her every breath. When Naomi smiled, it bowed its head slightly. When she placed her hand over her heart, the system registered the rhythm and reflected it with a gentle glow. Olivia watched, holding her breath. "What are you doing?" Naomi signed Marcus once said, "If technology has a heart, it will never turn its back on humanity." She pressed the final command. The words appeared on the screen, Symphony Protocol Humanity Mode activated. A beam of light filled the room. Everyone fell silent as the robot moved not mechanically, but gracefully as if alive. It tilted its head looking at Naomi as though it understood. Olivia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You've made the machine feel." Naomi smiled through her tears. "I didn't teach it emotion. I only reminded it that we once had it." Outside, sunlight poured over Chicago. The golden light flooded through the glass walls, wrapping them in warmth. Gavin stepped closer and whispered, "I think Marcus would be very proud." Naomi placed her hand over her heart and signed slowly. He never left. Olivia laughed through her tears. "You've made me believe that technology has a soul." Naomi looked out the window, the city shimmering under the sun. Silence surrounded her, but it was no longer empty. It was the sound of a world finally learning to listen. 3 months after the historic press conference, the name NeuroSync had crossed beyond America's borders. Technology magazines called it the human turning point of artificial intelligence. Newspapers, television networks, and universities all invited Naomi Brooks to speak, but she refused them all. While the world celebrated the deaf woman who taught robots to feel, Naomi chose, instead, to return to the 13th floor, the place that still smelled of steel circuitry and Marcus's memory. She arrived early every morning, bringing her old notebook and a cup of black coffee. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the handwritten words across the page, "Neurosync, a language of understanding." Out there, the world spoke of the technology as something miraculous. But to Naomi, it was still an unfinished promise. She wasn't yet certain that humanity had truly learned to listen. One morning, Olivia Tran entered carrying a thick folder. "The Global Board wants us to open 2 new centers, one in Tokyo and one in Berlin," she said, her tone bright with excitement. "They want you to be the international program director." Naomi looked up, her eyes kind but firm. She signed, "I'm not ready to leave this place. Neurosync isn't complete yet. There's still a part of humanity that hasn't been programmed." Olivia smiled softly. Which part? Naomi placed a hand over her heart and signed, "This part." That afternoon, Gavin Reed came to see her. He had long since stepped down as director. His clothes were simple now. His face changed, less arrogance, more stillness. He carried a thick envelope and placed it before her. "I've finalized the transfer," he said quietly. "All ownership rights to Neurosync are now under your name. Legal and permanent. Reed Tech has no further claim." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then signed, "You don't need to repay your mistakes with paperwork." Gavin gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "No. I'm doing this for Marcus. I took too much from him. It's time I give something back." He paused, his voice deepening. "You know, Brooks, I used to think silence was weakness. But you made me realize that sometimes silence is the only power strong enough to wake people up." Naomi nodded slowly, placing her hand on the table and signing with calm precision. "If you truly understand, teach it to others." Gavin smiled, bowed slightly, and left. His reflection disappeared behind the glass door, and for the first time, Naomi felt her heart grow lighter. That evening, Olivia sat across from her in the lab, excitement flickering in her eyes. She presented a new idea, Symphony for Humanity, an educational program using Neurosync to help deaf children control robots through emotion and gesture. Naomi froze. In her mind appeared Marcus at 16, hair messy, hands covered in oil, grinning from ear to ear. Someday kids will talk to each other with light, not words. Her eyes glistened as she turned to Olivia and signed, "Do it. This is the final piece of the dream." Weeks later, laughter filled the 13th floor. Deaf children from across the country were invited to test the new program. They sat in rows, palms pressed to the touch panels. When the robot's light turned blue, the entire room held its breath. A 10-year-old boy looked up, his face radiant. "It understands me," he shouted in sign language, his expression shining. Naomi stood nearby, her hands trembling. A small girl approached, signing clumsily. "Miss, I can hear the light." Naomi knelt down, placing the child's hand over her own heartbeat. She signed softly, "That's the real sound." Olivia stood watching, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she understood Neurosync was no longer a technology project. It had become a universal language of empathy, a way for people to listen to one another even when no words were spoken. That afternoon, after the children left, Naomi stayed behind. She opened an old photo of Marcus and set it beside the robot. The sunset poured through the window, lighting up his smile as if it were alive again. Naomi's lips moved, no sound coming out, but the words were clear in her heart. "We did it, Marcus. The world can finally hear you." The NeuroSync robot stirred the light on its chest, shifting to a warm golden hue, the color of sunlight of life of memory. Naomi looked at it and smiled, nodding gently as though answering an invisible greeting from the brother who still lived within every heartbeat of the technology they had built together. For the first time in 3 years, Naomi felt truly free, not because the world had finally heard her voice, but because she had taught the world how to listen. 6 months later, the Reed Tech building had taken on an entirely new look. A massive banner hung across the grand entrance bearing the words, "Symphony for Humanity, listen with your heart." Inside, hundreds of guests gathered for the official launch of the global education program founded by Naomi Brooks. Deaf children from around the world were invited to attend, their faces glowing under the brilliant light of the giant screen. Naomi stood backstage in a simple blue dress. Olivia Tran approached, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. Naomi smiled and nodded. She couldn't hear the music in the auditorium, but the lights and the rhythm of the crowd were enough for her to feel the energy of the moment. When the doors opened, hundreds rose to their feet. The stage lights cast a golden glow across her face, serene, gentle, yet commanding. Olivia's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome the woman who turned silence into the most powerful language the world has ever known, Naomi Brooks." Naomi stepped up to the podium, her gaze moving across the rows of children seated in front. She placed a hand on the microphone, paused for a few seconds, then spoke slowly in a voice still fragile but steady. 3 years ago, I lost my hearing. I thought my world had ended. But then I realized silence was never my enemy. It was the space that allowed me to hear what had never been heard before. The auditorium was so still that even the hum of the cameras could be heard. Naomi continued, her tone growing stronger. NeuroSync is more than technology. It is a reminder that every person deserves to be heard, whether through voice, through sign, or simply through a look. My brother Marcus dreamed of a world where those who are silent can still be seen. Today, that dream is no longer a dream. Olivia wiped away tears. The children below clasped hands and smiled. The NeuroSync Alpha robot powered up, radiating a warm golden light as it synchronized with Naomi's heartbeat. The entire hall glowed with that light, the light of connection. Naomi signed slowly. "Thank you for listening with your heart." Olivia's voice trembled as she translated. Then Naomi looked directly into the camera, her tone calm but firm. "If my story has reached you, teach someone how to listen. Start today. Start with yourself." Applause erupted like waves, rising and rolling without end. Among the crowd, Gavin Reed stood quietly, his head bowed. The lights shimmered over his face, revealing a faint, peaceful smile, the smile of a man finally at peace. When the ceremony ended, Naomi stood alone by the large window. Outside, the Chicago night shimmered with lights. She opened Marcus's old notebook, its final page, holding a single line. "If I am silent, let the light speak." She closed the notebook, her eyes shining in the dark. In her heart, Naomi knew the journey was not ending. It was only beginning. And as she turned back toward the glowing auditorium, her smile was soft and luminous, like a farewell whispered to the world. Listen, for even silence has a rhythm of its own.